to introduce her. But we are at the, from Palestine to Ferguson, political repression is a crime. And I just said Palestine, it's Palestine. I should have chanted that too, but I didn't. That was the other one that came to mind, it was a different one. So, Jenn Meeropol is part of the Rosenberg Fund for Children. She's the executive director of the Rosenberg Fund for Children, having succeeded her father, Robert Meeropol, after his retirement in 2013. We're happy to have the RFC co-sponsoring this convention. They did last year as well, and they've been hugely supportive of SDS, so I'm really excited for that. The RFC is a public foundation created to honor Jenn's grandparents, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, by assisting the family of This fund aids children in the U.S. whose parents have been attacked while struggling to wage peace, preserve civil liberties, safeguard the environment, combat racism, and organize on behalf of workers, political prisoners, the LGBTQ community, and others whose rights are under threat. So very similar line to what SDS tries to do in terms of our fight against political repression in our work as well. The RFC also helps young activists up to the age of 25 who are fighting for progressive causes and have been targeted because of their organizing. Since it started in 1990, the RFC has awarded over $5 million and helped hundreds of children and youth throughout each year. Background about Jenn. Before joining the RFC in 2007, Jenn received her BA from Harvard University and her MA from Brown University. Jenn then spent almost a decade administering programs in the nonprofit and higher ed sectors, including a program manager at Campus Compact, a coalition of nearly 1,100 colleges and university presidents committed to fulfilling the public purposes of higher education. She's authored or edited several journals and books, including The Communities College, Indicators of Engagement at two-year colleges, and One with the Community, Indicators of Engagement at Minority-Serving Institutions. SDS, I mean, the reason why we have this plenary going on is because SDS has been engaged in sort of the fight against political repression, specifically after the race that happened in 2010. But before that even, fighting for freedom for political prisoners like Mumia, Abudayyeh, Saada Shakur, etc. So it is hugely important to continue this work. A lot of progressive movements have grown out of that type of work, and it's unfortunately an ongoing problem, and it's becoming an even more intensive problem for activists, especially as we are young activists who I hope all of us continue to carry on a lifetime of activism as well. It's important to continue to raise these issues, and I think we have some panelists that will just do just that. So give it up for the rest of the plenary.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me? That's good. All right. So, oh, that's better. Thank you. All right, that way I do not have to yell, which is good because I will lose my voice. So thank you, SDS. A special thank you to Stephanie for all of her help coordinating this panel and making this happen. Absolute thank you ahead of time to our three panelists here who I'll introduce and turn this over to in just a minute. I just wanted to talk really briefly about the RFC and who we are and what we do. So in 1950, when my dad was 3 years old, his father, Julius Rosenberg, was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit espionage, basically charged with giving the secret of the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. A few weeks later, his mother, Ethel, was arrested on the same charges. They were tried, convicted, and when my dad was 6 and his older brother was 10, they were both executed. My grandparents, throughout this process, were given repeatedly a choice, and they were encouraged to cooperate, to talk, to name names, with the understanding that if they did that, their lives would be spared. They refused to do that, and that's a big part of the reason that they were killed. And the fact that they had children throughout this time period was used to try to force them to cooperate. So their love for the children was really used against them. And As you would probably imagine, this was an incredibly difficult time period for my dad and uncle. Their maternal grandmother, Ethel's mother, was colluding with the government and trying to convince her daughter to cooperate and support her brother, David Greenglass, who was the chief government witness against my grandparents, and trying to convince Ethel to turn against her husband. And part of her way of trying to get that cooperation was threatening to abandon the two boys, my dad and uncle, who were living with her at the time. And when Ethel refused to cooperate, her mother carried out that threat and dumped my dad and uncle in a shelter where they stayed for several months. Until their paternal grandmother became healthy enough, came home from the hospital and was able to take them in. But during the period surrounding the trial, there was so much publicity that it was decided it was in their best interest to get them out of the city, so they ended up staying for a while with family friends in New Jersey. Then the executions were about to happen. There was a fair amount of additional media attention, and it was revealed who they were and where they were living. And so during that summer, a number of the parents of their classmates became very unhappy with the fact that their kids were attending school with the sons of the Rosenbergs and petitioned the New Jersey School Board, which responded by passing a ruling that you can only attend New Jersey public schools if you were residents of New Jersey. So my dad likes to say that he has the honor of having been kicked out of the New Jersey public school system at the age of 6. They went back to New York. They eventually were introduced to and then went to live with Ann and Aby Meeropol, who adopted them. But even after they began living with the Meeropols, they were seized by government officials, placed in an orphanage again. There was a custody battle that ensued. The government tried to block the adoption, claiming that they were being abused, and not physically abused, but claimed that it was political abuse, that they were basically being raised to hate their government, their country, and that this was a form of political abuse. And that, my adopted grandparents fought that. They were successful. They won. My dad and uncle were adopted. Their names were changed. They kind of dropped from public sight. And that was a time period that, to this day, my uncle refers to as the long nightmare that really did end for them. And as bad as that was, it really could have been a whole lot worse. And the reason it wasn't is because there was a community of people who rallied to support them, donated money so they could attend progressive schools and camps and receive therapy and participate in creative and artistic programs. And in some ways, this was a Rosenberg Children's Fund before there was a Rosenberg Fund for Children. And that's where the RFC's mission springs from. We reach out to families who are living the same nightmare that my dad and uncle survived and try to help their kids in the same way that my dad and uncle were helped and supported. We made our first grants in 1990. We awarded just over $800 to send 2 kids to a couple of weeks of summer camp. This spring, we awarded almost $190,000, bringing the total granted to over $5.3 million in our 20-plus year history. And those grants have provided thousands of kids and young people across the country with the opportunity to attend therapy and arts programs and summer camps, with a special Attica prison visit fund that lets kids visit incarcerated parents and grandparents, and so many other educational and therapeutic opportunities. And we really, at the RFC, we have 4 guiding principles. All people of equal worth, world peace is a necessity, people are more important than profits, and society must function within ecologically sustainable limits. If you're working on behalf of any one or more of those principles, and you face repression because of it, you lose your job, you're harassed, you're arrested, you're injured, in some cases you're killed, your children probably qualify for RFC support. And if you're a young person, young activist under the age of 25 who's been active on behalf of any of those beliefs and you've faced repression because of it, you're probably eligible for RFC support under what we call our Targeted Activist Youth Program. So if any of that sounds like it might be meaningful for you, for friends, for classmates, for coworkers, grab a pamphlet, come talk to me afterwards. I'd love to let you know how we might be able to help with our grants. Like SDS, one of the things we're really proud of at the RFC is the broad range of movements and activists and communities that our grants support. Last year, we provided assistance to young activists who were grand jury resistors, environmental activists, those committed to religious freedom and immigrants' rights who faced repression for their efforts. We also provided grants for kids whose parents were active around environmental justice and labor rights issues, international human rights, free speech and free press, LGBT equality and reproductive rights, freedom for all political prisoners, Puerto Rican and Vieques independence movements, as well as peace and anti-war efforts, including Occupy activists. So that's who we are and what we do. And I really want to turn this over now to some panels, the individuals on this panel who, in many cases, they've either been targeted for their own activism or are organizing on behalf of friends or comrades who are facing repression for their social justice activists. I'm honored to be here with them today and with all of you to discuss their important efforts to fight repression locally and globally. Let me introduce them and then I'll turn the panel over to them. So we're going to start with Michael Sampson, who's one of the founding members of the Dream Defenders from Tallahassee, Florida, who's been a leader in organizing youth to fight back against murders of Black and brown youth like Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, and has now traveled to Ferguson to participate in the city protest to demand justice for Michael Brown. Michael, get us started.
I can yell.
You want to sit up here so you don't have to yell? Or we've got to fix
Awesome. So, like we said earlier, my name is Michael Sampson. I'm with the Dream Defenders down in Florida, a Black and brown organization that focuses around fighting against racism and national oppression. I've been around since the start, and I was asked to come to speak here about my experiences down in Florida, organizing against national oppression and against Black and brown, for Black and brown youth against violence from the state and from racist vigilantes, and also talk about my experiences going to Missouri and what that means to me, and hopefully, we can get some feedback afterwards and what y'all think about it. But so kind of to my history in regards to organizing in this movement. Dream Defenders started in 2012 after the Trayvon Martin death. Started with a 40-mile march from Daytona Beach to Sanford, Florida. There's a couple of people in this room who actually was on that march. And it ended with a day of civil disobedience. 6 of us, myself, and Chrisley, who's in this room. Chrisley, me and Chrisley, and 4 other people, we blocked the entrance to the Sanford police station, demanding that George Zimmerman be arrested, and the Sanford police chief at that time, Bill Lee, stepped down. And it was successful in regards to an hour into the sit-in, State Attorney Angela Corey in Florida called us and said she's going to arrest Zimmerman in a few days. To give her time. We kind of know what happened after that, but that's kind of the initial start of Dream Defenders and us taking action in Florida. Florida historically has been a state where like in the 60s and whatnot, you saw a lot of action around desegregation. But it's a fairly red state, fairly conservative state. You don't really see a lot of active organizations fighting against Black and brown oppression there, or against national oppression in Florida. You have a lot of different groups who kind of take a more moderate approach, the NAACPs, et cetera, et cetera. So we were kind of fresh and new in organizing youth to do that. So kind of the stuff like Trayvon Martin, of course. So after the verdict was handed down on George Zimmerman, he was acquitted of murdering Trayvon Martin, something that everybody in this room, I'm sure, finds disgusting, and it kind of shows that, for oppressed nationalities in this country, especially, Black and brown youth in this country, there's no justice in the courts. And we saw that with what happened with George Zimmerman not being arrested or not being thrown in jail for life for murdering Trayvon Martin. So immediately after that, folks in Tally, we called everybody we knew, and we got 500 people out in the streets in just under an hour to march for justice for Trayvon Martin, which led to a Capitol occupation of 30 days trying to get justice for Trayvon Martin, the longest occupation in the history of the Florida Capitol, something to be proud of. So that's in Florida, for example, you've seen a lot of cases of police brutality, racists taking a gun into their hands and ending the lives of black people. In Jacksonville, Jordan Davis was a 17-year-old kid. I'm actually from Jacksonville, Florida. He went to Wilson High School. We actually played them in football, and I used to go to the gas station where racist vigilante Michael Dunn didn't like the fact that Jordan Davis was playing loud music in his car with his friends, hanging out, and he shot up the car, killed Jordan Davis. Thankfully, 2 weeks ago, I believe, Michael Dunn was convicted of first-degree murder, and he will spend the rest of his life in jail. It took 2 trials for that to happen, which again is an injustice in itself. But that second trial wouldn't have happened without people power, without people in Jacksonville in the streets, without people all over the states, all over our country in the streets and protesting. And same with every other case that happens after that. What we see now in this country is sort of a sharpening of that contradiction between oppressed nationalities, black life, and the state coming down to repress it. We see, in Staten Island, we saw Eric Hardner. He was a father, just minding his own business. Cops say he tried to steal a cigarette. Tried to sell a cigarette, they put him in a chokehold, and now he died. And we saw a lot of mass movement around that. Folks in New York marched in the streets trying to demand justice, and that fight is still going on. And in Ferguson, we see Michael Brown walking down the street. Cop tells him, get the fuck off the road. He's trying to mind his own business. Somehow he gets shot at least 8 to 9 times with his hands up. Last words, hands up, don't shoot. And he's killed, and he's dead. In Ferguson, from my experience, what we all saw on TV, but going there, I was there for 3 days, and I was joining with folks there on the ground, but also reporting for Fight Back News. Going there, you saw what it means to the phrase, the masses are the makers of history. You saw that in Ferguson. You saw a rejection of establishment leadership. Normally in the past, you would have like an Al Sharpton, or more of the establishment type of people who go out to raise awareness. I have respect for him. Even Jesse Jackson was told by youth there to get out of our city. You aren't representing us. We see in Ferguson a new type of black youth leadership, no longer being confined to the backgrounds, no longer allowing simply a pastor to represent them, simply allowing the NAACP to represent them. They're going to represent themselves. And we see new organizations in Ferguson and St. Louis popping up everywhere, which is something that should be applauded and supported. This weekend, for example, there's thousands of people in the streets now protesting for Michael Brown. And also a few days ago, there was the death of 18-year-old, I'm trying to get his name, Derek Myers Jr. He was shot 16 times by St. Louis police. They say he had a gun, they say he hopped in the bushes, they say he had a hoodie. Police accounts changed every day on that. All we know is there's another black boy dead, shot 16 times by an off-duty cop. And he was unarmed according to witnesses. He had a sandwich in his hand. And we see a lot of mass movement around that. There was 300 people the day he got killed. There was 300 people in Shaw in St. Louis protesting in the streets without any, let's say, existing establishment like leadership during the protests. And that has its positives and its cons, of course, you know? But my experience in Ferguson was you saw a sharpening contradiction of national oppression. You saw people in the Ferguson people who no longer wanted to live how they were living before. They no longer wanted to see police randomly screaming at them, get the fuck out the streets. They were done with police randomly searching them and frisking them and treating them like less of a person. They were like, I'm a person, and I would be treated as such. And that's why they took the streets. The first week after Michael Brown was killed, you had 300 people out in the streets every day. And like I said earlier, this wasn't an action called by the National Action Network. This wasn't something called by the National NAACP. These were just people. The whole entire of them out there protesting outside the Quick Trip, outside the gas station that was burned down. You know, rightfully so, in my opinion. I believe they even renamed the gas station. When I was there, there was a spray paint. It was called People's Liberation. They renamed the gas station, of course, you know, and it showed the power of the people in that place. You know, they took the streets, and to go into repression, the militarization of the police force in St. Louis County. From my opinion, that happened because the people were winning. The people were organizing more people out into the streets. They were in the streets pushing militant action. And when the state, the police saw that simply scaring them with an arrest wasn't going to do anything, they sent out tear gas. I was there on a Sunday night. It was a Saturday night or a Sunday night. The day before, it was a very peaceful protest. People were out there on the streets, and so a lot of our experience, especially in regards to working with a lot of students, SDS, et cetera, we used to, let's say, student protests, a lot of students and stuff like that. There were students there, but it was mainly people from the streets, from the streets of Ferguson out there, who are closely tied to a hatred of the police force there. They're like, this is what I'm living, this is my neighborhood, this is my community, this is my land, and you can no longer do what you want to do with us. And they were out there in force. So the second night I was there, the first night I was there was, nothing happening. People were out in the streets celebrating because they pushed the police out that night. There were no cops in sight for that whole, there's a stretch of street, Florissant Street. Same street, down the street, there's another street there where Mike Brown was killed. But the street that goes into a bigger street towards the highway, they took over that street. That was their street. The people took over that street and liberated that street from the police. The next night, same thing. But at 12 o'clock, the St. Louis County Police decided that they had to show some sign of force. And they got in riot formation. I was near on the front lines, basically seeing what was happening. Folks were out in the streets saying, we're not leaving, we're not doing anything here. We're peacefully protesting. We're out here exercising our First Amendment right. We're here, we're not going anywhere. Why are you trying to scare us, putting on riot gear, scaring us with weapons? And what we saw was cops then retreated, then threw out tear gas canisters at the protesters and threw out flashbangs. I saw kids tear gassed, kids with signs got tear gassed. I myself got tear gassed a little. and tear gas kind of sucks. And which is an interesting story. After I got gassed, and basically when they tear gas, folks, people just run out of there. So I got out of there, and I went to a gas station down the street, and I told the guy who worked there, "Hey, I got tear gas down the street. People getting tear gas." And he was like, "Yeah, the tear gas they use here isn't shit compared to where I'm from. They used to use from Gaza." So he was like basically like kind of talking shit about the tear gas. And he even gave me a tip, like use an onion, crush it, pour it all over your face. The tips for folks here. But kind of submit that, that's what I saw. Like I saw a police state, a police force that were flat out lying about accounts of what's happening. They were saying that protesters surrounded the police, and then the police had to get in riot gear to defend themselves, which is total bullshit. There was nothing the protesters were doing to the police, but the police couldn't take the fact that people were out there in force protesting, protesting and not really caring too much about them being there, you know? What this means to me was, after I left Ferguson, I went back to like Tallahassee, and I was just reflecting on it, because it was a lot to kind of notice there and see people uprising against an oppressive state. And you know, we saw there like the sharpening of white supremacy, national oppression. We saw that there, and what that means to me there, the people in Ferguson were so empowered that when they saw a police officer, they were like, "We're right here. You're the same as me." And what the state and the police often do to black and brown people in this country is demonize them, scare them, and they try to make it seem like we're the cops, we're above you, you know, like we're bigger than you. And people in Ferguson aren't taking that shit anymore, because they think we have the power, we've shown you, we stare you down the face and you backed off, and you have to use tear gas to calm us down. We're powerful. And to kind of take that back to our campuses, you know, a lot of people care about this. You know, how does this apply to SDS? How does this apply to what the work we're doing, like, locally? Because not everybody can go to Ferguson and protest. And nor that we should. The people in Ferguson want us to go back to our local places and struggle, build struggle there. You see racism everywhere we go. Like some of our universities, you see a declining black enrollment. You see a declining black studies. You see students subjugated to all types of oppression. Those are perfect ways for us to organize and deal a blow to white supremacist national oppression. We have to organize. You know, that's the biggest thing. You know, like we see what happened in Ferguson, we see what's happening in Florida with Trayvon Martin, what organizing can do. But we haven't won yet. You know, we're nowhere near close to winning. And it takes us taking the information that we learned at SDS National Convention back to where we're going and organizing people, oppressed nationalities as well, around these issues that matter to them the most, and winning those campaigns. Because campaign by campaign, campaign by campaign by campaign, we can deal a blow to national oppression in this country. So that's my...
Thank you. All right, next we have Hatem Abudayyeh, who is the Executive Director of the Arab American Action Network, a grassroots organization that helps organize in Greater Chicago. He's also the National Coordinator of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network and a leading member of the Represion Defense Committee. In addition, his home was one of those raided by the FBI in September 2010, and as a member of the Anti-War 23, he writes and speaks across the country on political repression of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities.
Thank you, Jen. I want to start by saying Michael might not know this, but he's kind of a celebrity around my parts. You know, the folks in Chicago and around us, young Black and Latino and Arab youth that we work with at the Arab American Action Network, I mean, they know about the Dream Defenders, they know about the occupation of the governor's office, and when I tell them, oh yeah, Michael's my buddy, we talk at events together all the time, you know, they treat me better. And I want to thank Jenn and the work of the Rosenberg Fund for Children. You know, I played a little basketball in high school, and so my kid is 9 years old, my daughter, and you know, I tried to get her to play when she was like 4 and 5, and she didn't want to play basketball. But just the last few months, with support from RFC, she started playing at her local park district, and she just made her 4th grade basketball team. She's a tiny little thing, just like her dad used to be a tiny little thing back in high school, and she's going to be a point guard soon, so I'm happy about that. And thank you, Jenn, for your work and all the work of the RFC. You know, obviously I'm here, as I have across the country over the past year. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of Rasmia's arrest. It's a few days away. But also, you know, for 4 years, a number of us in this room, a bunch of folks who were raided on that day in September of 2010, are in the room here and have been talking and fighting back. And you know, the many things that resonated about what Michael said, one of the main things is that we're winning. And you know, we fought back in an offensive and not a defensive. Part of the work is defense work. Of course, we're doing a lot of defensive work, but we fought back offensively against the repression when we were raided. And it's because of strategic moves that we made that there have been no arrests. Nobody has testified to a grand jury. And there have been no indictments. So it's you know, we're because we're doing effective, impactful work that they came after us to begin with, and it's because we didn't back down and we fought back very, very strongly that they haven't been able to take any of us down. But you know, there's massive repression that's happening outside of the broader community, and I'm here to talk about the specific repression against Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims as well, but specifically Palestinians, because we know that there is something called Islamophobia out there, and we know that people are attacking folks because of their religion, and there's the ultra-right in this country that is attacking all Muslims and painting them with a broad brush. But you know, the majority of the prominent Muslims in this country who have been coming under attack have come under attack because they're Palestinians. Yes, there might be an identification as a Muslim activist or somebody that does work in the Muslim community, but you know, what needs to be known is that those folks are Palestinian, and their main area of work is in the Palestinian national movement, and that's what's under attack. They're not under attack specifically because of Islamophobia in those cases. They're under attack because they're part of a national liberation movement. And the Palestinians in this country are part and parcel, have always been, since the founding of the PLO in 1964. The main, you know, clear idea in the Palestine national movement is that we are part and parcel of the indivisible nation of Palestine. So those who are Palestinian in Gaza, or in refugee camps in Lebanon or Jordan, or in London or in Chicago, are part of this indivisible nation. And all of our work has always been about national liberation, and about the right of return, and about ending, you know, all of Zionist colonization and Israeli occupation of Palestinian and Arab lands. And that's why Palestinians come under attack here, because it's clear that we're fighting a national liberation struggle, and it's clear that we're fighting it in the belly of the beast, in the country in which the government supports Israel unequivocally. I'll get back later as to why that happens, but a couple other examples of what's happening recently. SJP, I know the young woman Tasneem spoke earlier, and she was fantastic representing SJP on this campus, but as the students, there are SJPs, there's probably 50 or 60, maybe more across the country right now, and they're doing absolutely incredible work everywhere, like organizing, you know, on their campuses, divestment work and boycott, divestment, and sanctions work, and, you know, professors who are Palestinian and Arab, and even non-Palestinian Arab who speak in support of Palestinians are under attack. Stephen Salaida, which is the biggest case right now in the entire country at the campus level, was fired by the University of Illinois because of his political work, his tweets actually, and his political advocacy in support of his people. There's going to be a national, I believe there is already starting a boycott of the University of Illinois, and it's going to pick up national momentum and national steam. And Loyola University, folks know about Birthright Israel. Any Jew from anywhere in the world can go to Palestine, to my father's land, and become a citizen of Israel immediately, but Palestinians cannot go back to their lands. And you know, my father can't go back there and become a citizen in his own land, in the land where his grandparents were and great-grandparents were born. But you know, the Loyola protested Birthright Israel when they went to try to apply and say, well, I'm from Palestine, so I want to go to my birthright as well. They went to try to apply at the table on the campus of Loyola University in Chicago, and the Zionists there wouldn't let them, and then the administration suspended the SJP at Loyola for doing that protest and trying to challenge the racism of Birthright Israel. Later on, a few days later, the suspension was lifted, but they're still under investigation, and so we've got to be careful there, SDS and SJPs around the country being ready to do whatever it takes to support the Loyola students there. Obviously, I'm talking about Palestine work, but you know, the social justice movements in general come under attack when they do impactful, effective work. And so whether it's the Black Liberation Movement, the Chicano Liberation Movement, the American Indian Movement, you know, Puerto Rican Independence Movement, environmental rights, queer rights, any social justice movement that has done good work in this country comes under massive repression. And the repression against us now are deportations and arrests and investigations and that sort of thing. But you know, we know the repression in the Black Liberation Movement meant devastation of entire communities and entire organizations and assassinations and that sort of thing. So we understand the context in which we are organizing and we are functioning. It's part of the reason why we took the United States Palestinian Community Network, of which I am the national coordinator for the U.S. We organized 100 people for a Palestine contingent specifically to go to Ferguson in unqualified solidarity with the people of Ferguson and the Black Liberation Movement. And our speaker there actually said those very words. Black liberation in this country means the liberation of everybody in this country. It is the most important, you know, oppressed nationality, community, and struggle in this country, in our opinion, and that's why we go to Ferguson, and that's why we work with Black and Latino and other immigrant communities in Chicago, because we believe our struggles are connected. But we're winning, as Michael said, we're winning, and that's why they went after my colleague Rasmiya. So there are brochures at the anti-war committee table back there. Everybody, I'm sure, has seen them. I just want to give a quick update on who she is and where we are on this case. And it's a really a landmark case, I believe, and I'm going to explain why that is. She's been an organizer for over 50 years, essentially. She's 67 years old. She was exiled from Lifta, which is adjacent to Jerusalem in Palestine, when she was 1 year old in 1948. And then when she was 16 or 17, she began doing really social services work, refugee resettlement work for her people, whether inside Palestine, later on in Jordan and in Lebanon. When she was 22, she was arrested by the Israelis in a sweep in which 500 other Palestinians were arrested. This was a year and a half after the war in 1967, in which Israel occupied the rest of Palestine. and it was a massive sweep. And she withstood 25 days of vicious physical torture and rape. She was the first Palestinian woman to publicly talk about the rape and the sexual violence that she experienced at the hands of the Israelis. She testified publicly in the United Nations in 1979. So when the United States, and she testified in court, in the military court, in 1969. Her father was tortured in front of her as well. In fact, the confession that she made was a forced confession because of the torture against her, but also ultimately because they were torturing her father in front of her. So she was forced into a confession. The State Department, because her father was a citizen, knew about it in 1969. The rest of the world knew about it in 1979 when she testified to the UN. So for the United States to come back 45 years after that arrest, and 10 years after she received citizenship in this country, and say that she was dishonest on her application when she said she was never in prison or she was never convicted, that can be nothing but a pretext for going after an absolute legend and icon in the Palestinian community of Chicago, of the United States, of the entire Arab world. That's the type of person Rasmiya Auda is, the type of name that she has and the reputation that she has in the Arab world. And going after, top leadership in our community means what? It means if we can go after the icon Rasmiya Auda, the 50-year veteran of organizing, then we could go after any single one of you, and all of you that are trying to do BDS work, that are trying to do student activism work, that are trying to do divestment work and all that sort of thing. That's why there is repression in this country. That's why there is repression against our community specifically. Because we are winning. Because boycott, divestment, and sanctions is making a dent. Because of the resistance in Gaza. This is all connected. The Palestinians won the war against Israel in the last 2 months ago. They won that war because they had a united and unified resistance against the 5th strongest military in the world, and everybody in the world as well. World opinion, except for the Western Europeans and except for the United States, was with the Palestinian people and their struggle. And, the United States does not want to see the Palestinians win. They do not want to see independent, sovereign Arab states make decisions that are in the best interest of their people. It is why they go to war against Iraq in 1991 and again in 2003. It is why they threaten Syria at every turn. It is why they threaten Iran at every turn, because the United States benefits from having Israel in the Arab world. The United States has a special relationship with Israel, not because the Zionists control U.S. foreign policy, not because the American Jewish community here is strong, not because the Israel lobby is strong. Those things are true on some level, but it's not the reason why the United States supports Israel unequivocally. They support Israel unequivocally because Israel is the watchdog for U.S. imperialism in the Arab world. Israel plays that role, and the number one role that it needs to play is to make sure that it represses the Palestine National Liberation Movement, and by extension, U.S. law enforcement plays that role here by trying to repress Palestinians and our community members here. So Rasmiya was arrested and charged with unlawful procurement of naturalization, immigration fraud, essentially. The other thing, Meredith will talk more about the raids that in her home and mine and others, but the investigation of me and the raid on my home, that they discovered, quote unquote, Rasmiya during that investigation. So when our defense attorneys in Rasmiya's case recently had a motion to dismiss, the basis of that motion was the legal terminology of the fruit from the forbidden tree. If that investigation, which in 4 years has brought nothing, no indictments, no charges, no anything, a violation of constitutional First Amendment rights, then that means that them discovering Rasmiya in that investigation should be fruit of the forbidden tree and it should be dismissed. The judge rejected that and ruled against that dismissal, that motion to dismiss, but the judge did rule just recently that the torture expert who has been working with Rasmiya, who believes that Rasmiya has post-traumatic stress disorder, and that played a role in her answers in the application, that he will hear her testimony at the hearing on October 21st. Understanding that, you know, these victories, yes, they are legal victories, and yes, people know the name Michael Deutsch, and they know the name Jim Fennery, and these are some of the best attorneys in the country on cases like these. But when the previous judge recused himself, he stepped off the case because he's a Zionist pig. The reason why that happened is because of strong legal work, but it's also because of all the people in the room and all the people with CSFRs, the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, and USPC around the country that put continuous pressure on him until he finally admitted that yes, he did have ties to Israel, and yes, he had been providing massive fundraising for Israel for years, and he said, I still have nothing against Rasmiya Oda, and I will be unbiased, but somebody in the street might think that I won't be unbiased, and so he stepped down, and that was a massive victory for us as well, and for the movement. So I'm going to wrap up by saying this. We need SDSers from across the Midwest, and even if you want to come from California and New York, to be in the courtroom starting November 4th when the trial starts. We believe it'll be about a 2-week trial, and we believe that we also got a ruling from the judge in which his courtroom is a small one, only seats about 30 people. They're going to have a bigger courtroom for the trial because they've seen that we've been out there for every single status hearing, 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 people filling that courtroom because of, you know, to show the whole world that Rasmiya has this massive support. And it's been from Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims, but also from students and folks from the black community and the immigrant rights community and all that sort of thing. So we need to continue to do that. We need you to make plans for that with the Anti-War Committee and other folks, CSFR and other folks here. We need to fill that courtroom and be outside with a constant presence throughout that trial. And the other thing is, just the last thing, Jen, is that, you know, the prosecution has been attacking us from day one. And the U.S. Marshals in front of that hearing, that courtroom, that courthouse, have been attacking us every time we go there, trying to bully us, thinking that we don't know our rights, trying to keep us from supporting Rasmiya, from chanting in front of the courthouse, from providing the public support that we need to do. And they even put a motion in the court just recently, essentially criminalizing that support work, criminalizing us for doing that, calling us mobs and hordes because we were carrying Palestinian flags and banners and signs in support of Rasmiya. The same people that they're attacking in this motion are the people who have been already under attack in the investigation since September of 2010. They know it's us that are leading the defense work for Rasmiya, and they're trying to criminalize us and her in the public eye before that trial comes. So they're trying to make it, they're trying to get the judge to have an anonymous jury where the defense and Rasmiya do not know the names of those jurors and that they're not known to the public as well. Which essentially says to the jury what they're accusing us of doing, tampering with the jury. That motion is tampering with a potential jury more than any other, because it's telling that jury that this woman is a dangerous woman, her supporters are dangerous, you know, and they're mobs and hordes because they're Palestinian women who wear hijab and Palestinian men who wear beards. That's essentially what it is. It's a racist, disgusting move, but it's a desperate move as well, because we're making gains. In this case, we're making gains in the Palestine support movement, and we're making gains across the world in the liberation movement in general. And people in Palestine know that this case is as important to them as resisting the Israeli assault on Gaza, because it will mean everything for what we can continue to do in this country. You all have been supporting us from day one. I know you will continue to support us. Rasmiya is going to win in her case, and the Palestinians will win their liberation as well. Thank you.
Our last panelist today is Meredith Aby-Keirstead, who's a longtime anti-war activist here in the Twin Cities. She's a co-founder of Minnesota Anti-War Committee, which is a grassroots group which works against U.S. militarism and war. Meredith has participated in human rights delegations to Colombia and Palestine, and has used those experiences to speak out against U.S. military aid. In 2010, her home was raided by the FBI, and she was subpoenaed to testify about her activism and the information she got from human rights activists on her travels. She refused to cooperate and instead has become an advocate for civil liberties. And I'll wrap up my favorite part of this introduction, that she's also the mother of the cutest kindergartner in the world.
Thank you, SDS. Thank you, SDS, for the opportunity to speak at this year's, does that work, everything? It's a red button. Does this work? Yeah. Why are you doing that? All right. Thank you, SDS, for the opportunity to speak at this year's National SDS Conference. SDS has been on the front lines fighting against political repression and is one of the anti-war 23. I want to thank you. Like every year at this convention, you guys have gone out of your way to show solidarity with us, and we say thank you. I also want to take this opportunity as one of the anti-war 23 to say thank you to the Rosenberg Fund for Children. They have been incredibly supportive of our kids, and this is one of the first opportunities I've ever had to publicly thank them for their support. As Jen said, I'm an anti-war activist here in the Twin Cities. In 2008, I was a part of the Coalition to March on the RNC and helped organize a national protest against the war on Iraq, using the Republican National Convention as a vehicle for organizing against U.S. imperialism. Unbeknownst to me, the Anti-War Committee and the Coalition to March on the RNC were infiltrated by a member of law enforcement working for the FBI to spy on the anti-war movement. She was one of many law enforcement agents working as spies and agent provocateurs in the movement leading up to the RNC. But unlike the other cops, she stayed for 2 more years. She stayed to investigate us for our work in solidarity with the people of Colombia and Palestine, and she and the FBI made up allegations of quote-unquote material support for terrorism. Unfortunately, this political reality is something that the student movement knows all too well. In The Burglary, which is a book I totally enjoyed reading this summer, Betsy Medgars documents the story of the break-in at the Pennsylvania FBI field office in 1971, where anti-war activists stole the COINTELPRO documents that they then released to the media. And the FBI memos that they shared with the world, Hoover orders all FBI offices to investigate and infiltrate black student unions across the country. He orders them to investigate all progressive professors, because obviously they're communists and should be investigated, and to infiltrate the student anti-war movement. They even have documents to show that if university administrations were not cooperative with the FBI in their efforts to go after student organizations, like, for example, the president of the University of California at Berkeley was saying no to the FBI in their efforts to try to infiltrate on campus, then Hoover actually used his power to have them removed as administrators. And so this is unfortunately something that your movement knows a lot about. Well, on September 24th of 2010, I found out that COINTELPRO was alive and well because it came to my front door. The FBI banged on my door and told me that they were looking for material support for terrorism, and would I help them find it? My response was no. And so they rummaged through my family's belongings as I kept the agents from waking up my 18-month-old daughter who was in the crib in our home.
And I called my partner to come home so we could get her to daycare and get her away from her house that had no longer was a safe space. It was now a space that was occupied by the FBI. Audrey was 18 months, and so she was very young, and she doesn't have memories of this experience, unlike some of the other children that are a part of the Anti-War 23, and this is one of the ways that the Rosenberg Fund has been very helpful for us. The FBI took my computers, my phone, my personal photos, and pictures of demonstrations, signed petitions against U.S. military to Colombia, and boxes of flyers and notes from 16 years of political activism. The search warrant for my home said they were looking for evidence of material support for terrorism, and that they wanted evidence of who I had political relationships with in the United States and abroad, and specifically talked about how they wanted evidence of how I indoctrinated people into joining the anti-war committee. I would argue that it is totally offensive that a judge issued a search warrant for what should be constitutionally protected activity. According to the First Amendment, we allegedly have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association. And the evidence they took from my home was not evidence of a crime. It was evidence that myself and other people that I organized with have opinions. That is not evidence of a crime. They also wanted evidence of how the anti-war committee fundraises. And I think this is particularly funny because several of you have already learned this today. We sell t-shirts, and we sell buttons, and we sell overpriced cocktails to other people, and then sometimes we sell your crap to you, and we call it a yard sale. But I'm just saying, like, you know, we have like a really sophisticated fundraising operation. So I don't totally understand why that's worthy of a national investigation. I think that they could actually investigate the Department of Defense. I think that they have a lot more money than us and do a lot more. So that the anti-war committee was targeted because of our solidarity work with Palestine and Colombia. Ironically, the reason we do solidarity work is because in places like Palestine and Colombia, activists who work for social justice and who speak out against U.S. policy or against their repressive governments that receive money from the United States are targeted for state-sponsored violence. Many of us in the anti-war committee have seen this firsthand because of our travels. We've seen how the Israeli government uses home demolitions, the bombing of apartment buildings, and cutting off food to attempt to pressure Palestinians to stop demanding their own freedom. In Colombia, we've met with campesinos who've told us about massacres committed by government-sponsored death squads that they conduct these massacres in order to push them off their land so that oil companies can have it, or to silence them from protesting U.S.-sponsored free trade policies. We've spoken out across the country about how our tax dollars fund the suppression, and we should have the right to do so. The fight against political repression is the fight for the right to organize for social justice, and that is why it is so essential that SDS is a part of this fight, because of course, this is also a fight for SDS. During the raid on my home, I was subpoenaed to testify at a secret grand jury in Chicago, which was convened to lead a witch hunt into the anti-war movement. Now, most people don't even understand what a grand jury is. I always find this part really ironic because I teach government for a living. I didn't really understand what a grand jury is. But unlike a trial, you can't bring in your own attorney, you can't refuse to answer their questions, and there's actually like no scope of inquiry. It can literally be a fishing expedition to find something to prosecute you for. One of the particular reasons why, obviously, we had no interest in participating in this grand jury because we were not interested in participating in legitimizing this witch hunt against the anti-war movement, but also specifically the government in their documents has said that they wanted to talk to us about what people in Palestine and Colombia had said to us. And as somebody who already, you know, there were people that I met with in Colombia who talked about how they had to sneak around paramilitary, you know, checkpoints in order to be able to come and meet with us and asked us to not say the names of what communities they were even from because they were so worried about political retribution. If people already risked their lives to talk to us, there's no way I'm going to violate that. And so I just think it's important to understand that the very nature of the things that they wanted to talk about were also things that could literally get people killed. Since 2010, 23 people have been subpoenaed in the Midwest to testify at this grand jury. All of us, as Jen said, have refused to testify. And many of us here. So I also want to acknowledge not only that Hatem and myself who are up here, but also Joe, who spoke earlier, Tracy, who was on a panel earlier today, and Nick, who is here, and as well as is here. And so like we have, so many of us, not all of us, but many of us are here today. Unfortunately, we are not alone. We are not the only victims of political repression. Unfortunately, it's a big group. Ironically, 4 days prior to the September 24th raids, the Office of the Inspector General of the United States revealed that the FBI has systematically and wrongly spied on political activists. So I find it ironic that, like, within the Department of quote-unquote justice, they even acknowledge that they're doing this. The Partnership for Civil Justice Fund has reported that the government documents obtained through their FOIA requests show that the Department of Homeland Security conducts daily monitoring of peaceful lawful protests as a matter of policy. Functioning as the secret police force, they have a threat management division, right? And the threat management division, goes after and investigates, people who are doing protests. And it's important to note that none of the anti-war 23 have been formally charged with a crime. We haven't even been jailed for refusing to testify. But for 4 years now, we have been waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waking up every morning at 7 a.m., wondering if today federal law enforcement has come back. But this time, instead of taking our stuff, they're going to take us. And if they're going to separate us from our children. The Justice Department says this case is ongoing, and I think it's important to recognize the most specific way that they do that is by talking about how much they dislike Hatem. And so I think it's in which Hatem did talk about the fact that he was specifically mentioned just last week in the documents from the prosecution saying that he is, part of, this, I don't know what their phrasing was, but it was
conspiracy.
Thank you. This bullshit, but they specifically went after him, as well as the CSFR, that we are trying to intimidate this non-existent jury. But I think it's important to note that that is one of the ways that they make it very, that they keep reminding us that they have us and they haven't decided what to do with us, but that doesn't mean that they've decided to leave us alone. Even though we haven't been indicted with any quote-unquote crime, political colleagues of ours have been targeted in a way to try to get evidence against us. In 2011, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department SWAT team and members of the FBI conducted a raid on veteran Chicano activist Carlos Montes' home. He was charged with a bogus weapons violation, but when he was taken into custody, the FBI pressed him for information on the anti-war 23, as well as Freedom Road Socialist Organization. That was definitely like what they wanted to talk to him about. He, like the 23, refused to cooperate. Montes had worked with us on the Coalition to March on the RNC, and had worked with members of the anti-war 23 through the immigrant rights as well as the anti-war movement for years. And we mobilized the Committee to Stop FBI Repression to defend Carlos. We had protests, we had call-in days, we raised money for his legal defense, and we built a national grassroots pressure campaign to defend Carlos. Literally, thousands of people from around the country spent over a year working on Carlos's case, and we were successful in defeating his prosecution. We are using those same strategies to work in solidarity with Resmia. In 2013, Resmia was arrested for alleged immigration fraud, and again, we see a connection to our case. Resmia is a co-worker of Hatem's, and the prosecutor in our case, Zionist Barry Jonas, was seen in the courtroom working with the prosecution on her case, even though it is not his area of responsibility for the U.S. Attorney's Office. We are defending Resmia as we defended Carlos, and I am not in jail today because of organizations like SDS. A national organization like SDS has the power to prevent these miscarriages of justice from happening, okay? And you have the power to help stop the prosecution of Resmia and the punishment of her from happening. And so just as you defended us, we and the Committee to Stop FBI Repression are asking you to stand with us to defend Resmia. And we want to thank you as SDS for your solidarity. Activists are under attack. What do we do?